through Friday from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're here live, then restreamed on the web at prisonplanet.com and Infowars.com. Well, my guest really needs no introduction. She's a more modern feminist, you could say. I agree with the report she's put out, the analysis she's done about how destructive pornography is for both men and women, and her analysis fits with the scientific reports I've seen, which, of course, she covered, where this is what we have her on about today, but I'm saying she's very accomplished about how it doesn't turn men into these raving rapists like people thought it would 50 years ago. It actually turns them into men who don't interface with the women in their lives and who live in a fantasy land. It's very destructive for men, not just women, but that's some of the stuff she's written about. She's written multiple best-selling books, as I'm sure many of you know, and now she has valiantly come out and put out a new book, The End of America. And she also has written an essay called Fascist America in 10 Easy Steps. And we have links to Amazon.com where you can get her book and a lot more up on Infowars.com. Naomi Wolf, thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me.
When did you start to wake up to the police state that's really accelerated its expansion under the Bush administration in the last 7 years?
Yeah, well, it was definitely not something I wanted to think about, but I have a friend who's the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and she kept insisting when we talked about news events that they did this in Germany, and I was sure that this was, very extreme, irrational talk, but she finally forced me to sit down and start reading. And, of course, I've discovered that she wasn't talking about National Socialist outcomes, 38, 39, 40. She was talking about 1930, 31, 32, when Germany was a parliamentary democracy, yes, a fragile one.
The Weimar Republic.
Exactly, but a small group of people began very systematically to use the law and dismantle the Constitution and put pressure on citizens to subvert the law, and that opened the door for everything to follow. And then when I started reading this, I saw that not only were tactics and strategies being reproduced exactly right now by the Bush administration, but that actual sound bites and language and images and scenarios and sort of film moments are being reproduced. And then to summarize quickly, I looked at other times and places where a would-be dictator, whether on the left or the right, wanted to close down a democracy or crush a pro-democracy movement. And I looked at Italy in the 20s, I mentioned Germany in the 30s, Russia in the 30s, East Germany in the 50s, Czechoslovakia in the 60s, China's crackdown on the democracy movement in the 80s, Pinochet's coup in Chile in 1973. And what I saw, Alex, was that there is a blueprint. I mean, that everybody who wants to close down a democracy does the exact 10 things, they're 10 classic steps, and that unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, we're seeing each of these 10 steps being put in place in the United States today.
And you pointed out, and I've interviewed actual special forces colonel commanders from Vietnam and other places where this has been carried out, and people who are involved in death squads in Latin America, that our own government, not just the School of Americas for Latin America in Fort Benning, Georgia, but other military bases and other spy schools and other officer training schools for foreign cadets are actually training the world. The U.S. for the last 50 years has been covertly, but now it's accelerating, training the world how to carry out these very policies, this very blueprint.
Yeah, it's very, very distressing, especially if you're a patriot. And, we can live in this bubble, as I did until I was, 43 and started researching this, where you really think, we are a force for good in the world, and we should be, and often we are, but what you've just said is horrifically true. I'm sorry to say that the great dictators, Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, developed this practice that is so effective, and then what happened was petty dictators in the second half of the 20th century and up until the present learn it, study it, transmit it, and unfortunately you're 100% right. The School for the Americas, under our auspices, teaches would-be dictators, especially in Latin American countries, how to set up their own death squads, suppress dissent in their own countries, crack down, round up journalists in their own countries. The same blueprint, the same 10 steps.
Now, going back,
miracle. Sorry, I was just going to say it's kind of this really incredible lesson that since we turned a blind eye as citizens to how we were exporting this all over the world, paradoxically, we don't recognize, because we're not in practice, we don't recognize these blinking red warning lights happening right now at home that democracy activists all over the world can recognize. And they're going, oh, my God, no, don't let the executive have more power to declare martial law. Don't let the executive have more power to round up his political opponents and put them in solitary confinement for 3 years.
Now, going back to the roots of this with Hitler, and he was, of course, expanding on other systems of control, going back to the Romans. He adopted a lot of the, and I've read Heinz Hobel's Order of the Death's Head, a lot of the Jesuits' systems for controlling countries. And so Hitler was building on a lot of sciences that had been developed before he came along. But I'm sure you know this, and I haven't finished your book yet, and I'm wondering if it's in there, that Prescott Bush was actually the head Nazi agent in the U.S. The McCormick-Dickstein committees exposed this. The guy that was about to be the Marine Corps Commandant, Brigadier General Smedley Butler, they tried to hire him to overthrow the government and set up a fascist dictatorship. So to see Bush even calling it Homeland Security, it was Fatherland Security there, setting up a Homeland Security, which is the Gestapo/SS. I mean, they're really going down the line. And then when you learn, and I'm asking, did you know this, that the Bushes actually got their first seed money from Fritz Thyssen, the man who bankrolled Hitler? Yeah.
Yep. Well, I have to say, as you're speaking, I'm very rarely at a loss for words, Alex, but I'm so kind of overwhelmed with emotion from what you just said, because you're the first mainstream talker to say this truth, which is, historically 100% accurate and profoundly important for people to understand. There was an attempted coup. Are you there?
Oh, hello? Yes, I'm here, Naomi.
Okay. There was, as you just said very bravely, to thousands of listeners, there was a scheme in the 30s, and Prescott Bush was one of the leaders of this scheme, industrialists who admired fascism and who thought it was a good idea to have a coup in the United States along the lines of the coup that they saw taking place so profitably for corporations in Italy and in Germany. And you are 100% right that Smedley Butler, and actually I have a good friend who's reporting this out and has access to the original documents, and he's telling me about Smedley Butler even as you're speaking. So it's like this, truth is just like coming out all over the place. Smedley Butler had gone along with violent regime change for much of his career, but he was approached by these conspirators, including Prescott Bush, and he outed them, and he testified to Congress, and that these people were planning a coup in the United States. It's in the congressional record, and you are 100% right that Prescott Bush was in alliance with Thyssen, the great industrialist, the Nazi industrialist, and made millions and millions of dollars, basically the Bush family fortune. And then what is amazing to me and resonant to me is that when the Nuremberg trials finally were put in place, and these Nazi industrialists, some of whom had colluded with Americans, including, by the way, IBM, were about to be brought to trial and sent to prison, there was a moment at which they were going to look into turning the spotlight on their American partners. And that's why when I look at the laws that the Bush White House has drafted, like the Military Commissions Act of 2006, which are so consciously designed to protect Bush and his co-conspirators from being indicted for war crimes, just as the Nuremberg conspirators were indicted for war crimes, that seems to me to resonate from the family history. The family history is you can make so much money, uniting corporate interests with a fascist state that violently represses people. And that's why when I saw, the